I got in touch with my former office manager from Gardner, who is now in the Lynn office. She arranged for my rehire. Jan and I talked about the options at great length. We really liked the North Shore area of metropolitan Boston with its ready access to the ocean. The risks seemed minimal. After all, I was going to be making a good salary again. I believed that with a different attitude and goal and my new educational credentials, I would be able to move into some kind of a training position within Social Security or something else in this broad metropolitan area. We sold our Butler Street house and realized about $11,000 after expenses. Since we weren't sure where we wanted to settle, we decided to rent. We liked Marblehead and found a large apartment in an owner-occupied building. The landlord, Anatoly, was a Russian, Jewish immigrant with his own young family. Our daughters often played together. It was while we were living in Winthrop Ave that I bought my first computer, the Apple II, for about $2,200. I could not have realized the implications of that purchase. When I opened up the computer to see what was inside, I was amazed at the empty space. My infatuation began. Every night and weekend, I would spend hours learning how to program the computer. Instead of buying expensive applications, I would buy books and magazines that contained program code to accomplish the same functions as over-the-counter software or for entertainment purposes. In most cases, I would customize the program by adjusting the program code, tweaked it. While I was working for SSA, I programmed a biorhythm application that produced a printed chart based on a person's birth date. I brought the chart into work to show around. Several people wanted one of their own. At $3 a printout, I sold more than 30 charts to people at work. Marblehead was marvelous, a beautiful, vibrant town with many excellent attractions, a great place to raise kids. But it is an expensive place to live, even to rent. The kids had a good life there. Paul Jr. came to love the waterfront and the ocean. Jennifer flourished in the school system and kept busy. Paul spent a couple of summers in a children's program on one of the islands just offshore from Marblehead Harbor. While we lived in that area, we became very involved with the Unitarian Church in Swampscott. It was a well-endowed church with a very liberal congregation and minister. Jan and I got actively engaged with the people there and made some good friends. Nowhere else have we ever been so involved with any group or organization than we were at the UU's in Swampscott. Those of us interested in non-traditional gatherings on Sunday were allowed to create our own forum. Our sessions or discussion groups were held at the same time as the main service. They were attended by as few as 3 and as many as a dozen or more people. Even the minister attended a couple of these sessions. The format of a meeting took many forms over the period that we were there. Many interesting and informative talks were held in a lovely room that looked out into the atrium. The religious education program was designed to engage the children in an active and enjoyable way. Stories from the texts of various religions were used as the basis for various activities. The religious education program employed a full-time person. Our closest friends were Larry and Pam Swift. They actually had 3 children of their own in the same age group as ours. We would see them once every few weeks at least. Actually, they were at the center of a larger social group which we became a part. Janet worked at a couple of daycare centers while we lived on the North Shore. She could have applied to a couple of hospital pharmacies in the area, but chose to work closer to home at a job she would enjoy. As time went on, the job at Social Security became increasingly tedious and unfulfilling, especially as it became more apparent that training unit was closed to anyone lacking the appropriate political connections. I was also philosophically opposed as the Reagan administration's punitive efforts to recover overpayments from those on supplemental security income. This was already the welfare program for people having a really tough time or disabled and having a tough time. The stress level was increasing and I was becoming very restive. Without any real plan, I submitted my resignation. Thus began a very troubled time for us. We moved to a less expensive apartment in Marblehead Center. not too far from Abbott Hall. It was also very small with few improvements, a definite step backwards in terms of the living arrangements. I tried to earn money by cashing in on my computer skills. I put ads in the paper to train others in computer applications and took on students as a tutor. But this did not come close to paying our expenses. We were burning through our savings, money we had promised not to touch. In time, I answered an ad for a teacher for the jobs training program run by the city of Salem. I taught business math to students in the program. Within a year, I was in Gloucester with one other instructor to teach participants to earn a GED. This involved instructing them in a variety of subject areas, and I enjoyed the experience a great deal. Didn't pay enough, however, and job security didn't exist, so I had to move on. I applied for several teaching positions in the Boston area, but there was nothing on the North Shore. I was offered a computer and math position in Abington, and I accepted. Abington was on the South Shore, so once again we had to move to another part of the state. Boston North Shore and South Shore are very different, with the city acting almost like a wall in terms of accessibility. We rented an entire house in Rockland. It was a large house with 2 finished rooms and a bath upstairs. We were to spend over 10 years in that house. I was never very comfortable there. It was not in good repair, and the position of the house kept it rather dark and lacking access to much sunlight, but it was cheap, so we stayed. My tenure at the high school was short, only a year. I did enjoy teaching computer courses, not the math. I developed a technique for instruction that I've used ever since. To allow students to advance as rapidly as they might, I set up project sheets for them. Each project contains a lesson and reinforcing tasks. This permits more adept students to move right along and gives me time to work with students who need more help. Not too long after we arrived on the South Shore, I sent a letter to the editor of the Patriot Ledger newspaper, suggesting a computer column written by someone in their readership area and offering my services. I got a call from him and was invited to submit a column. If it worked out, my column would appear every few weeks. I would submit any material via modem, linking my Apple to their mainframe over the phone line. Over the next 2 years, I wrote 26 articles for the paper. It was a big ego booster to see my name in the paper. The money wasn't great, $25 per submission. In addition to the paper, I had several pieces published in computer magazines. Some of those articles were software reviews for which I received free programs. A fortunate result of the newspaper articles was a job interview at Curry College in Milton for the position of Director of Academic Computing. The assistant dean, Jim Salvucci, a real power on campus, was impressed with my ability to communicate and apparent expertise. Such an opportunity was beyond my imagining at the time. I was euphoric. This was a dream job. The directorship of the new position on campus, and during my interview, it was explained that I would be required to teach half-time, meaning 2 courses. I would be considered faculty with the rank of instructor. I would be expected to work during the summer under a separate contract. The starting pay was $18,000, but I would actually be making substantially more than that in very short order, in part because my course load was increased to 3 per semester. Not too long after beginning the job at Curry, we filed for personal bankruptcy. After I resigned from Social Security, we had to draw down on our nest egg that we had tried to preserve from the sale of our house in Worcester. Eventually, we exhausted that money. Worse, we began to use our credit cards to pay bills, even to make minimum payments on other credit cards. The debts mounted, eventually totaling some $20,000, almost our combined salaries for a year. Though I managed to continue this dangerous balancing act, I could possibly have dug back out after several years of scrimping, but we decided to try to start afresh. Paul and Jennifer were still very young, and we didn't want to deprive them. In effect, we were sacrificing any chance of buying another house for years for the chance to start anew. Also, it would force us into a posture of fiscal discipline. Amazingly, the bankruptcy process allowed us to specify which debts we chose to discharge. We were able to keep 2 credit cards, Discover and American Express. The bankruptcy court was not as traumatic an experience as we had expected. We were not lectured or cross-examined. We just sat there as the judge passed judgment and dismissed us. This was a tremendous burden lifted from both of us. It was actually a very happy day. About a year later, Jan and I took a trip to the Cape. As we were walking the streets of Hyannis, a fellow approached and promised us $100 in silver coins if we could attend a resort sales pitch. Against our better judgment, we decided to go for the money. Of the two of us, I am the most impulsive. As the timeshare presentation continued, I began to feel that this might not be a bad idea. The resort network was so extensive that it seemed we might be able to save substantial sums on vacations. Also, we were able to start the resurrection of our credit rating. We walked out as owners of 2 weeks at the Courtyard Resort in Hyannis, but we were now $7,000 in the hole, not counting the $210 a year in maintenance costs. In the years that followed, we were able to take several great vacations to different parts of the country, from Vermont to Aspen. We stayed in some lovely, often very spacious condos that we would never have fit our budget otherwise, but we had to be very flexible as to the time and place and have a little bit of luck. In 1999, Jan and I decided to sell the timeshare. Surprisingly, Paul Jr. wanted it. I got the appropriate forms from the county and transferred ownership to him gratis. I managed to avoid using any real estate agent or attorney. He only paid the annual maintenance fee. After moving to Rockland in 1983, Janet worked at the Kmart department store in the town for a couple of years. In another lucky break, there was an opening at Curry's child care program, and she was hired as a teacher. Now both of us were working at the same place. After a couple of years there, she transferred to the administrative side, to the career placement office in the Hafer building. She eventually moved on to the faculty building, where she was an administrative assistant for the humanities department. Not too long before we moved to Rockland, I began experiencing anxiety attacks during the night. Up to that point, I had always been able to count on a good night's sleep, and now that area of security had been breached. Everything that had been happening had taken its toll emotionally. I have always been a moody, but my episodes were increasing in frequency and severity. The blues became bluer. I sought professional help. For a time, I was going about once every month or so to Dr. Greenberg. She would put me on an antidepressant medication. The best treatment, though, was not the drug, but my new job at Curry. For several years, that was enough to offset the depression, though my nighttime anxiety attacks became chronic. The campus mainframe was actually a digital mini-computer, a PDP-11, named Zelda by the staff. The administrative head of computing was Gary Kelly, younger than I and very competent. The new microcomputer lab, located in the basement of the library, had just been outfitted with 10 new digital Rainbow computers that could run 2 separate operating systems, CP/M and MS-DOS. MS-DOS was a Microsoft. There was also a single Macintosh computer representing a new conception of computing that utilized a highly graphical, iconic interface from Apple. My computing expertise was based on the Apple II environment, but I was facile enough to adapt to the character and command-based Rainbow machines. I started this job with more enthusiasm than any other. There were over 100 faculty at the school, and I believed that I had to get to know all of them in order to carry out my mandate to move the college into the computer age. In the following few months, I met as many of the faculty as possible. To compensate for my less than perfect memory for names, I would jot down notes about whoever I spoke to, who they were, what they looked like, and as many other characteristics and observations as I could. These notes were compiled into a database that I could reference. To my surprise, the task of familiarization and memorization wasn't as taxing as I expected. They were an easy group to talk to, and with all the committees and faculty meetings, I had many contact opportunities. Almost from the beginning, there was a political battle of sorts as to which operating system would dominate Curry's academic environment. Ron Warner, the head of the fine arts, lobbied strongly for the Mac. I was already pro-Apple, but I canvassed the faculty and learned as much as I could about the philosophy of the college. A significant program on campus, PAL, Program for Advancement in Learning, had a great deal of clout because it attracted students with learning disabilities, which helped differentiate Curry from most other colleges. Another factor supporting the MAC was its networking capability, which allowed those machines to be configured quickly and relatively easily to allow the sharing of peripherals and even transfer files between the machines. I submitted a report recommending the Apple Macintosh as the academic machine of choice, explaining that the new iconic operating system that utilized a mouse as the primary input device seemed to be a perfect fit with the PAL program and the college's emphasis on supporting all students who needed extra help. As a result, within 2 years we had replaced the Rainbows with the Macs. I also pushed for the use of Macs in the administrative offices, and that effort paid off as well. Over time, I found myself in control of a substantial budget and responsibility for all academic computer purchases. Responding to the demand of the students, faculty, and staff to offer a discount purchase program for the college, I negotiated a HEP, or Higher Education Purchase Program agreement with Apple Computer. Managing this program, especially the physical inventory, took up some significant parcels of space, time, and energy. The school received around 6% for handling fees. There was another perk that offset some of the efforts I devoted to running the purchase program. Apple paid for yearly trips to a major company computer shows. For the first several semesters, teaching the college students was rather a unsettling experience. Over time, it became less so until, as I became more comfortable with the students and more confident in my own abilities, I looked forward to classes. As the first person to occupy the directorship, I helped define its scope. In addition to my regular responsibilities, I was to work to familiarize faculty with all things having to do with computing. The student-faculty discount program fell naturally into my lap. Later in my tenure, all office PCs and maintenance contracts became my responsibility. In 1987, I was awarded the Faculty Achievement Award, and I also advanced to an assistant professor. I never campaigned for this expanded role, but I did endeavor to point out the needs and deficiencies in the computing area to the administration. As a result, I was usually asked to address the problem. After some 5 years of handling the job single-handedly, I explained to the dean that it was getting to be too much for one person to handle. I said that I would have to quit if I didn't get some help. An assistant was authorized. Marianne Gallant, who had taught in the Curry Daycare Center, had been teaching word processing, was my choice. She was an indefatigable assistant and very popular with students and staff alike. A year or so after that, the new dean, Keyes, asked if I was interested in becoming the college's computer czar. This was at a time when I was leaning in the direction of teaching full-time and letting someone else take the administrative responsibility. The stress was getting the best of me again. I also felt like I was beginning to get in over my head, and the technical expertise required was beyond me. The years spent at Curry were interesting, challenging, and rewarding. I was the most gratified by the impact I had on the academic program. The curriculum and basic structure of the department I created is still in place. Until I left, Macintosh computers reigned at Curry. It was becoming clear, though, that Windows machines would have to be brought in for the business programs. So it was understandable that the college would eventually convert to Windows because of the operating system's 90% penetration. Also, Windows as an operating system was an evolution by Microsoft to more of an icon-based interaction with the computer, much like the Macintosh had had. I have good feelings about many of the students who attended my classes. To be a teacher is to have an influence on someone's entire life. In classes, I attempted not only to inform, but to encourage students to broaden their perspectives. Lunchtime on campus was a particularly enjoyable time for me. Gathering with other faculty, engaging in animated discussions was great fun, and even the pressure valve of sorts for me. Meals sometimes lasted 2 hours or more. and the group might include as many as 8 to 10 people. This was also a great opportunity to move my own agenda along in a less than formal setting. There must be something in my genes that can't stand stagnation. I could have settled into a routine and accepted the status quo, but the college was experiencing financial difficulties, and my efforts to network the campus was running into a brick wall. I had also a great desire to abandon the directorship and teach full-time. I was frustrated on all these points. Had I been accommodated on any of these wishes, I believe I would have stayed, but I wasn't. One thing I was very proud of occurred from January through August of 1990. During that time, I was able to drop from 204 pounds down to 137 through a combination of exercise and switching to a vegetarian diet. I had a sabbatical for the first half of the year, so I was able to focus my energies on my weight program. I began by spending an hour or so walking around the cemetery that was just basically across the street every day. Over time, I increased both the pace and the length of my walking till my speed walking was up to 3 hours a day. The weight literally came pouring off. When I returned to campus in the fall, my colleagues were stunned, and some thought I was suffering from some kind of wasting illness. The kids think of Rockland as their hometown, Paul especially, and they grew to maturity in the town, and it was from within Rockland that some of their closest friendships blossomed, and where Paul Jr. met his future wife, Alicia. My years in Rockland were difficult, though. The commute was stressful. The house was roomy but dark and depressing. During our years there, I had my worst episodes of depression. I was treated by Dr. Greenberg, a psychiatrist, but I don't think she really understood how deeply affected I was by my condition. The poor kids didn't know how to take these episodes, likely thinking I was angry with them and so didn't want to spend time around a dad who wasn't taking or showing much interest in anything. Janet did understand, but didn't know how to help me out of these episodes except show patience and prompted me to talk about it. Even though I would shut her out at times, she persisted, and over time I pushed myself to dig out of the black hole I was in and talk to her. She has always been my anchor and confidant. While we lived in Rockland, we took some wonderful family vacations, though. We traveled south to spend a vacation with Barbara in 1984 in the Washington area. In 1985, we traveled north to Bar Harbor, where we stayed at the same hotel Jan and I spent our honeymoon at in 1972. The kids even took a propeller airplane ride over the island. In 1988, we stayed at Attitash Mountain Village in the White Mountains, and from there drove up to Quebec City for a time. In 1990, we flew to Aspen and stayed in a luxurious condo, and the kids took whitewater rafting trip while I took a long walk up a Pine Mountain. The kids had their first horse riding experiences. We also got to see some beautiful balloons. At one point, we got stuck at the airport because President Bush happened to be visiting at the same time. In 91, Paul Jr. and I traveled to Bar Harbor and spent several days exploring and hiking all around the area. We climbed up Sargent Mountain. We had the place almost to ourselves, making it all the more magical an experience. The same year, the whole family traveled to Florida, where we visited Kennedy Space Center. As Jen's high school graduation gift, we took Kristen Perrault and drove to Prince Edward Island to pay homage to Lucy Montgomery, author of the Anne of Green Gables series. It was back down to Virginia in 1992, where we spent time at Williamsburg and visited Yorktown, meeting with my sister Barbara and Shelley again. Even with the fun we had on those cross-country trips, my biggest regret was not being father to our children that I should have been. I was so preoccupied with my job, especially my obsessive preoccupations with computing and programming, that I neglected spending enough time with the kids. My depression was misunderstood as lack of interest in them or the family. These were years when they needed guidance and togetherness, a time of strengthened family bonds. Ever since, I have felt guilty about my shortcomings as a dad. Until Rockland, I believed I was more of a kind of dad that I should always have been.